News from Israel. On March 23rd, Israel will hold its fourth election in 2 years, and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu hopes a world-leading vaccine rollout will finally help him establish a stable majority. Now, the main contenders of Israel's March 23rd elections are Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Blue and White Centrist Alliance leader Benny Gantz, Yesh Atid leader Yair Lapid, and Labour Party leader Mary Micheli, Yamina Party leader Naftali Bennett, and Likud director Gideon Sa'ar, who broke with Netanyahu to form his own A New Hope party. But as the crucial polls inch closer, thousands of Israelis have taken to the streets to protest against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's policies and leadership. While Netanyahu is counting on his highly successful vaccination campaign to propel him to victory, local reports suggest that over 20,000 protesters gathered at the Paris Square close to Netanyahu's official residence. The protesters waved flags and carried posters shouting, "Maybe go home."
We are here to protest against Netanyahu and his corrupted government. This is our last chance before the election.
I came to speak and protest about the situation when the government is probably going to win this election, and somebody needs to stop this, because the government will be worse than it used to be, and the people must vote differently.
I'm here to overthrow Benjamin Netanyahu. We have been here since the summer, expecting it to be better in Israel.
The protesters are demanding Netanyahu's resignation over the alleged corruption scandals and mishandling of the pandemic. Netanyahu has been in power for the last 12 hours, and the leader hopes to retain his seat in the Tuesday vote. Remember, Benjamin Netanyahu is the first Israeli Prime Minister to be indicted in office for corruption and bribery. However, he has denied any wrongdoings. The series of elections have been going on since April 2019, but the winning parties failed to form the government. Experts say that Netanyahu's Likud party is likely to emerge as the biggest player, but polls predict that Israel's election is heading towards a deadlock. And we are now being joined by Mir Javdanfar, a West Asia analyst from Tel Aviv. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, Netanyahu is counting on his highly successful vaccination campaign to propel him to victory. However, people are out on the streets, like we just mentioned, protesting against his policies. How do you assess that?
It's going to be a tough call with these elections. On the one hand, people are sick and tired of repeated elections. As you quite rightly said, it's going to be the fourth election. Which we're going to have in 2 years in Israel. There is a lot of opposition against Netanyahu, as we saw during the repeated demonstrations every Saturday evening, and the biggest demonstration was held this week. However, at the same time, Israel is the first country to emerge from the post-COVID world. And this is likely to count in his favor, Netanyahu's favor. This is in addition to the fact that Israel has managed, under his leadership, to establish diplomatic relations with the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. And these are significant diplomatic gains. So there are strong pluses for Netanyahu, but there are also strong minuses, which is what makes this election very difficult to call.
And of the main contenders, who do you think is Prime Minister Netanyahu's biggest competition in these polls?
When we look at the numbers, it looks like Mr. Yair Lapid, his party could win 19 seats in these elections. However, much like everything else to do with Israeli politics, there are complications, because the other parties who are anti-Netanyahu, such as the New Hope party, which is expected to win 9 seats, and Naftali Bennett, which is also expected to win 9 seats, it's not clear that they will want Mr. Yair Lapid as their leader. So it's difficult to see who is going to be the head of the anti-Netanyahu opposition government, if it's going to be formed, when one of the major parties, Naftali Bennett especially, has said he will refuse to sit Mr. Yair Lapid. So again, the opposition party, the opposition bloc against Netanyahu is also divided.
All right, and also, just for more clarity on this, polls predict that Israel's elections are heading towards a deadlock. What can you tell us about that, and what happens if that in fact is the case this time? We know that the previous coalition did not work out.
oh, we'll have another election, which is a disaster for our economy, and we don't have a budget. But this is what I mean from my previous comment regarding the divided opposition. And it's not clear whether Netanyahu will win a majority, his bloc will win a majority, but it's also not clear that if the opposition formed to get more seats than him, whether they will agree to join, to form a coalition. Which is why, number one, it's again, to reiterate my point, it's a very difficult election to call. But also it's possible that we will go to elections again. But the only thing that could change all this is if people in the cities, especially Tel Aviv, turn out to vote in greater numbers. Tel Aviv has one of the lowest participation rates in the elections, something like 61%, whereas other cities, especially religious areas, they have 77 or 80% participation rate. If the Tel Avivians manage to vote in greater numbers, we may be able to, the opposition may be able to break the deadlock against Netanyahu, but we'll have to wait and see for that.
All right, Mr. Mir Javdanfar, thank you so much for joining us with all those details. We will be tracking this very closely.